And now as we move into a new part where there's like vaccinations coming out, and addressing this new sort of anxiety of re-entering society. Um, how does that look? What does that look like? It's a lot of unknowns, and that created a lot of increases in things like depression and anxiety. And I mean, they really increased depression by 4 times the amount, anxiety 3 times, and other mental health conditions, and increased other things like substance use. So we've seen a lot of impact from this. The American Psychological Association, which is the general association for psychologists in the nation, puts out an annual Stress in America survey. And as expected, there was a pretty significant decline in mental health over the past year. And it wasn't just the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. There was other issues going on, like the mass shootings, like climate change, things that have been ongoing for years that are still a source of concern. Immigration issues, the opioid epidemic, things like that. And they've concluded that we are facing a mental health crisis. It's a concern. And then again, the general climate of what's going on with the Black Lives Matter, a lot of the what we call isms, but gender, race, ageism, all of these isms are kind of being recognized at this point in a different sort of way. And there's a big divide. It's getting bigger, and where one side is against the other side. And there's a lot of stress based on that. You see it in social media, Facebook posts with people having these terrible comments, and it's increasing a lot of stress for people. We can go on to the next one. And we can't forget about the children. A lot changed for them. School closed. They moved from an in-person setting. Many children were all virtual for the remainder of 2020. And a lot of children are still sort of in between in-person and virtual. There's a lot of change. What parents can do is check in, see how your kids are doing, how's it going. There was, even as early as the early shutdowns in mid-March of last year, a large increase in mental health claims that private insurers were noticing. So it is having a large impact on children. There's increase in, and we will talk about it later, but suicidal thoughts and things like that. So one of the things that you can do is check in, just how are you doing? Let them know that you're there. And that's it for me.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Pennington. Next, we're going to go over just a few really common mental health conditions and the symptoms of them. We have Dr. Jennifer Ferrand and Dr. Dana Martinez, and I will let them each introduce themselves and talk to you this evening.
Thank you so much. I'm Jennifer Ferrand, and I am a clinical health psychologist, and I work in Hartford Healthcare. My role currently is not a patient-facing role. I am the Director of Wellness for Hartford Healthcare, and so we work with healthcare providers, and we work on strategies and initiatives to improve the experience of working in a healthcare organization. That being said, I do have a private practice, so I do still do clinical work. And what I want to start by noting is that we really want to paint in broad brush strokes here. Oh, and Jennifer, you can go on to the next slide. Thank you. paint in broad brushstrokes by giving you a really high level overview of some of the common symptoms that are typically associated with various mental health conditions. So please take this information as really just a jumping off point, and with our support to have a conversation with your doctor or a mental health professional if you're concerned about yourself or others. And we can move on to the next slide. And so we're really focusing on things we might see a lot of during the pandemic. And the first thing is depression, right? So the important thing to know here is that depression is a mood disorder, but interestingly, low mood doesn't necessarily present the same way in all people, particularly children. So if you're seeing mood changes or a persistently low or irritable mood for 2 weeks or more, and this is coupled with several of the other symptoms you see here in things like physical changes or cognitive symptoms, difficulties in the way you're able to think or concentrate. If you see those things in conjunction with each other, then depression might be an issue for you. And I would recommend talking to a professional if you're having recurrent thoughts of death or suicide. This is in the absence of any of these other symptoms, right? So like this is a symptom that's mostly like often related to depression, but not always, right? It could be in some cases a medication side effect, but recurrent thoughts of death or suicide are always a reason to talk to a doctor. And we can go on to the next slide, which is about anxiety. And if we're really boiling it down here, anxiety is fear. And, you know, I have the same sort of caveat about anxiety disorders that I have for depression, which is that anxiety looks different for different people. And there's also lots of types of anxiety disorders. There's at least 10. And we won't get into all of them here, but Charlie Brown here is a really sort of a prototypically anxious person, and the symptoms you see here listed are ones that are generally associated with what we would call a generalized anxiety. But you can have really specific anxiety symptoms too, like a phobia, which is a fear of a specific thing. And anxiety is totally normal. So the way to know if your anxiety reaches a level that might require some attention is if your fears are affecting your life or your ability to do the things you enjoy. And moving on, obsessive compulsive disorder is often covered in the media, and we see it a lot in the popular media as well. So it's worth talking about here so that you know what it actually is and what the symptoms include. So I think the picture of Monica Geller here is an excellent example of what OCD looks like. And basically it includes two things. It includes obsessions, which are repeated reoccurring thoughts that are unwanted or upsetting, and compulsions, which are repeated behaviors or acts, like mental acts that you do inside your mind that are performed in response to these obsessive thoughts or anxieties or self-imposed rules. So a lot of people, what we think about it is that compulsions are done to reduce the anxiety that's caused by obsessions. And a lot of people say they have OCD and joke about it. And honestly, a little OCD is not a bad thing, like if you'd like a clean house. But you know it's a problem if symptoms are time consuming, or they're causing a great deal of distress, or other people are starting to notice that they're interfering with your life. And so I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Martinez, who will take you through the rest of our common conditions.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Dana Martinez. I am in private practice in both Newtown and Wilton. And I'm just going to talk very quickly about the eating disorders. So the pandemic has, the loss of the routine that the pandemic caused led many males and females both towards eating disorders, or I think most commonly disordered eating. But what I'm going to talk about is just the three main eating disorders that we tend to see that can be actually very dangerous physically. Because we know that eating disorders have the largest mortality rate of any mental illness. Anorexia being the first, where an individual significantly restricts food intake and can result in significantly low body weight in a very short period of time. However, the person may have disordered body image and not recognize it at all. But definitely anorexia is should be evaluated by a physician, and pediatricians with their weight curve can usually pick up on this very quickly. Bulimia is eating a huge amount of food in a very short period of time, or not necessarily a short period of time, over a period of time, but then using inappropriate behaviors to compensate for those calories. So individuals can self-induce vomiting, they can exercise excessively, use emetics or laxatives, all of which have significant impact on the muscles and electrolytes in the body, which makes it very, very dangerous. Binge eating disorder is also part of bulimia. So eating the large amount of food without the getting rid of the calories with the inappropriate ways. So individuals feel like they have no control over their eating. They eat past the point of full. They feel extremely uncomfortable, but cannot stop themselves from eating. And that results in ultimately just feeling very disgusted with oneself and extremely guilty. Those are the three basic eating disorders. So we will move on to alcohol and substance use. Jennifer, who's doing the alcohol and substance use?
I had you doing that.
Oh, okay. I wasn't. So the alcohol and substance use disorders, individuals have also, just like they can turn to the eating disorders, in the pandemic, alcohol and substance use disorders have also skyrocketed because, again, the loss of the routine takes people towards these substances to self-soothe. What do they look like? Regularly drinking, more than one should, a hard time controlling and cutting down the alcohol or other substance abuses, drinking, and despite these all have a significant impact on relationships, but an individual is unable to stop the use despite the negative impact on the relationships. And if the person attempts to stop or reduce, they may have withdrawal symptoms, which speaks to the tolerance that they have already developed. Trauma and PTSD. So some individuals who have already had some traumas and which are exposures to difficult or traumatic events, sometimes when they feel like they may die or a threat of harm, may have had a recurrence of the symptoms through the pandemic. Again, with the pandemic, individuals have lost their regular routine, their ways of coping, the significant isolation, and can lead to difficulty sleeping, the nightmares. If an individual has had trauma, they may be re-experiencing the events. they have physical or psychological distress when they're reminded of the trauma. And again, the part of what I have found that has reincited the trauma is the loss of so many of the coping skills that individuals have put in place, which has been either social or work or school or whatever they've needed. All those were removed because of the pandemic and the isolation. So many of these symptoms can oftentimes come back. Another symptom of trauma is negative thoughts, feelings about what actually occurred, and an inability to get it out of one's head. So with guilt, blame, and shame as a result of the thoughts, and an increased arousal. So either being irritable, startling easily, feeling very on guard, difficulty concentrating, and definitely sleep problems. So now we'll hear from Dr. Kathleen Chapman.
Hi, thank you. I'm Dr. Kathleen Chapman. I work for Connecticut Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, where I'm a clinical manager at a state-operated community mental health center. And I have led the suicide prevention efforts there for the last 6 years. I'm also a member of the Connecticut Suicide Advisory Board and co-chair of the clinical work group. And my colleague, Andrea Duart, I think is listening in right now. And I also have a part-time private practice. So today I just wanted to go over some information about suicide prevention, which I hope will be helpful. And definitely there's more to learn, and there'll be some links and information on the slides that you'll get. Before we start, I just want to say that suicide is a very complex and personal issue. None of the information that we talk about today is meant to apply to any individual person. And I know some of the other presenters have mentioned those broad brush strokes in understanding this, and that's what we'll be doing here as well. Just generally taking a look at what do we know and what helps. And if you feel like you want to take a break from this, and I'm going to be talking for 10 minutes and you want to come back to the next topic, that's totally fine. Suicide is a public health issue. It's in 2019, 47,000 people died by suicide nationally. Rates have been increasing since 1999. It's a top 10 leading cause of death nationally, and actually the 11th leading cause of death in Connecticut, based on the last statistics that I have. It's the second leading cause of death for youth and young adults. However, the rates are highest among people middle age, and certain groups as well, such as American Indians and Alaskans have high rates. So what do we know? Since 2001, the Surgeon General has put out a national strategy for suicide prevention. And since then, there's been a tremendous amount of research and public awareness. So we know a lot more about assessment, about treatment. So this picture kind of captures what we know about suicide, just generally. There's things that we call risk factors that come from different parts of people's experience and lives. And that can be biological factors, environmental, social factors, psychological factors. That someone is it's just part of who they are, that we all have them, we all live with them. For some people, it might be harder than others. Some of the issues that we just talked about previously, like trauma, other really difficult experiences like depression, anxiety, may make that person at a little bit higher risk. However, this does not predict that somebody is going to make a suicide attempt. However, if you combine all these together on top of a current life event, like someone loses a job or a breakup of a relationship, someone's been arrested, then if you add with that access to lethal means, then that person is going to be at much higher risk. So this page is just some examples of the biological risk factors. So you can see it can be ongoing illness, Learning that you have a chronic health condition can be a risk factor. A big one is social risk factors, including feeling a lack of belonging. There's been a lot of research in how important that is feeling like you have belonging, that you're connected to other people and that you're valued. And having a feeling of lack of belonging is a big risk factor. Additionally, emotional pain. A lot of these risk factors are risk factors because they contribute to people's sense of distress and emotional pain. Environmental risk factors, we're all aware of the issues around COVID with social isolation. And environmental risk factors may also be access to lethal means like guns. We know that in areas where guns are more prevalent, there's higher rates of suicide. So access to guns are definitely increased risk because someone can pick up a gun in an impulsive moment. And so that's something just to be aware of. So on the next slide, we'll look at a little bit more about protective factors, which are really important for all of us to deal with any of the issues that we talked about previously: depression, anxiety, trauma, or just our daily lives. And these are things that bring a sense of strength, that inspiration and hope into our lives, and helps to develop coping skills and resilience. So having that network of friends, feeling that you have something where you're contributing, that a sense of value, spirituality, connection with families, pets, positive relationships, a therapist, all of those are important to strengthen. So in talking about suicide prevention, it's helpful to understand warning signs, because these are the things where we know we need to intervene. We know that somebody is really having a hard time. They're having thoughts of suicide, and it's possible that they may make an attempt. That is when it's so important, if you have a friend or a loved one, someone you know, that's a good time to ask. People are generally ambivalent when they feel like making a suicide attempt. And sometimes someone just asking them and helping them, listening to them and helping them get help can avert a suicidal crisis. So some examples of warning signs, including just you have a sense that something's off with this person. They're not acting like they usually do. Maybe you know they've had some increased risk factors, or something has recently happened that's been very stressful or difficult for them. And you notice that they're isolating, there's increased alcohol or drug use, people are more impulsive when they drink, which increases risk quite a bit. They are joking about suicide, saying things like that nobody would miss me. They talk about feeling like they're a burden to others, feeling trapped, unbearable pain. These are all very important to pay attention to. Also, preparatory behavior. Somebody, suddenly, do you notice someone in your families saving up medication, buying a lot of Tylenol? You notice that maybe they have a gun. These are all important to pay attention to and ask about. And we're going to talk about how to do that. Here are some other things that you might hear people say. The statements can be very direct, such as "I've decided to kill myself," and some of these other statements. Or the next page, we'll see some of the indirect statements, as I mentioned before. "I'm tired of my life. I just can't go on. I just want out." This last one, "If I die, will I go to heaven?" actually been said by a child. So the next slide, we can talk about children a little bit. Mental health issues can increase suicide risk for kids and young adults. Children and adolescents don't have the same cognitive development as adults, so they don't see things with an adult perspective. They may feel that what's happening right now is the way things are always going to be, and not realize things will get better, that this is temporary. Research shows that a third of children and adolescents talked about suicide prior to a suicide attempt. And statements such as "I wish I was dead, I won't be a problem much longer." So we talked about asking early, asking often. This illustration shows that how we automatically say fine when someone asks us how we are, but that's totally not how we feel. The next slide shows that just a lot of these people are well known for their struggles with mental health or have died by suicide, and yet no one would have guessed by their appearance. So that's why it's so important to ask. Sometimes people believe if you ask, you'll put the idea into somebody's head, which is a myth. Next slide. So I just want to take a minute to talk about these steps. So if you are concerned about someone, of course, always contact a mental health provider or their doctor. But here are some things that you can do if you're just wondering how someone's doing. First of all, talk with them privately. Ask them directly, are you thinking about killing yourself? Have you ever felt like falling asleep and never waking up? And then listen. Let them tell you their story. It's not a time to give advice or try to tell them, oh, things will be better. Just let them talk and let you know what's going on. And then just be aware of the environment that the person is in. If they have guns or they have a big, huge bottle of Tylenol or something else that you're concerned about that they might use to make a suicide attempt, help that person to get those things out of the house or lock them up or in some way put distance between them and a lethal means. So when you're talking with them, definitely be acknowledging their feelings, listening to those feelings and acknowledging them, whether you agree with what they're saying or not, and then help them to make a connection. Be there with them when they make that phone call, say to 211 in a crisis, or help them make that appointment by sitting with them while they call a psychologist or their primary care provider for a referral. And maybe even, go with them, give them a ride. And really importantly is to stay connected. After a suicidal crisis, it is so important to just do the outreach with what's called a caring contact. Just calling somebody up and saying, hey, how are you doing? Has been shown to be really effective in preventing suicide. I just want to mention with children, if you're concerned about how a child is doing, saying to them, is there something that's too big of a problem? Is something feel really hard for you right now? And then again, directly talking to them and asking them whether they're thinking about suicide. Intervention, there's a variety of interventions. The crisis talk lines you'll see on this page, of course, calling 211 for adults and children. There's inpatient, intensive outpatient care. There's a lot of evidence-based research on actual treatments, including brief intervention and ongoing therapy that has been shown to help. And suicide is something that's always addressed separately, no matter if someone's dealing with depression or substance abuse. You treat that, but you also treat the suicidal thoughts as well. So next slide. This is something that is so exciting. Connecticut Suicide Advisory Board and Andrea Dewart, who I mentioned before, has worked to develop this book for elementary school kids and older. And it is basically, the dog is Gizmo. He's a therapy dog. He's the world's smallest therapy dog. And this is a really friendly message on explaining to kids what mental health is, talking about daily life activities that promote mental health, talking about how to identify trusted adults in their in their lives that they can talk to, helping kids to understand what feelings are, when to talk to somebody, and even coming up with their own mental health plan. Additionally, there's this great website, Gizmo for mental health, where kids can, which is interactive, and kids can work on their own mental health plan. There's also tomorrow, the information's on the slide, there'll be a Gizmo Possum Guide for Mental Health read along, and for elementary school kids and adults who are interested in their well-being tomorrow. And you can see that information there. If you'd like to have more information about suicide prevention, again, there's a lot of resources. On Friday, there's a talk Friday, May 14th from 1 to 2 on Talk Saves Lives, Suicide Prevention. And that's through the Connecticut Clearinghouse. And if you go to the ConnecticutClearinghouse.org, it's ctclearinghouse.org. In the resource section, you'll see how to sign up for that. In the search section, if you type in Gizmo, you'll find the information for the read along. And I'll let Dr. Farron take over.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap up this portion of our conversation by talking about means restriction. And I am talking about this as a representative of Hartford Healthcare, because Hartford Healthcare is an organization that really cares about suicide prevention. And what I want to communicate is that all the other organizations, the healthcare organizations and the behavioral healthcare organizations in our state also really care about suicide prevention. And we're very lucky to have a lot of really passionate people and smart people in our state, putting a lot of energy and resources to suicide prevention. And we work together to make sure that if you go get healthcare or behavioral healthcare anywhere in our state, that we're basically doing the same thing and we're providing you the same level of excellent care with regard to suicide prevention and keeping you safe. And so one of the things that we know is that restricting access to lethal means is probably the single most impactful thing that you can do as an individual or we can do as a community to reduce suicide risk. And most people who make a suicide attempt and live report that they think about it for less than 10 minutes before they act. And so, you could be considering suicide for a long time, but the amount of time that most people think go between sort of like actively thinking about it to actually making an attempt is really short for most people. And so the goal in means restriction is not to prevent people from accessing means of self-harm, but really more to increase the amount of time that people will spend between sort of thinking about it and actually acting. And we know we cannot control people's access to all means of self-harm, but research tells us that the types of means we should focus on are firearms, because they are the most common method of suicide and they are highly lethal, and also medications, because these are the most readily available means and they can also be really lethal. So there's a lot of information and resources out there specifically about firearm safety, and I included a website here. The same website was on the last slide and this slide, where you can find all the links that I listed on that last slide, plus lots and lots of other information that is specific to Connecticut. So we highlighted in the last slide, which you probably read while I was droning on and on, we highlighted here some of the most important tips for firearm safety specifically. And one thing I want to mention is that if you do this last item, considering removing firearms from your home during periods of crisis, if you do ask somebody to hold a firearm for you, there is a form you have to fill out. And we are including information, I think a link to it, in the resources that we'll be sharing later on. Okay, and now I can go to the next slide. Because here in this next slide, I've just really just highlighted again some like really important high-level sort of tips for medication storage. And there are many, I want to highlight here that there are many good reasons to lock up your medications, not just if you're concerned about access to lethal means, but also because it's just kind of the safe thing to do. If you have children or pets at home, or if others come into your home. I know a real estate agent, and she asks people to lock up their medications when they're showing their home for sale. And I have friends who have had medications stolen out of their home. I know somebody that got medications stolen out of their home by like a FedEx delivery person one time. So this is something that we don't often think about, but there's lots of really good reasons to really just sort of care for and be mindful about the way you store store medications. And again, the website listed here will direct you to a lot of really great resources, not just about means restriction, but really about anything you need to know about suicide prevention in our state, and then more specifically, reducing access and safe storage here in Connecticut. Oh, and one more thing. If you need a lockbox for your medications, I'm going to put my email address in the chat box here, and I would welcome you to email me, and I will make sure you get one. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really important information. Dr. Sherry Kelly, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about how to improve your mood and take care of yourself.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. I am a psychologist. I'm based in beautiful West Hartford, Connecticut. And I specialize in families and kids and teenagers. I'm the founder of Positiva Teens workshops. So I'm going to talk about mood and getting ourselves through this prolonged period of COVID. So many of us feel like we're almost hitting the wall. Like this is a marathon of stress that we've been through and we're burned out. So I'm going to talk about how we can move beyond that. So one of the things that we know from psychology research is that it's really important to take some action, to do something. There's a name for this. It's called behavioral activation. So we want people to get out and get moving. We don't want you to just stew. At the same time, we do want you to validate your own feelings. Your feelings are important. It doesn't mean hiding your feelings. It means really acknowledging your feelings and giving yourself permission to feel sad, giving yourself permission to feel tired of this uncertainty in our lives. And by grabbing onto that, that's when you can work through. You know, you can't break through hitting the wall or break through or bust through burnout unless you've actually acknowledged what you're going through. So we really try, to figure out ways that you can cope. There's a matrix for coping. It involves validating your feelings. It involves taking stock of your inner resources, taking stock of your support network and having friends and family around you. I have a really good way of doing this, which is called MAKE, M-A-K-E, but it stands for doing these 4 things every day. In your life, every day, you should have MAKE. Mindfulness, just taking stock. And mindfulness can be something as simple as calming yourself down, thinking about your breath, thinking about what your emotion is, what you need for yourself, for your mind, for your body that day. It can be a gratitude practice. Think of 3 things that you're grateful for and your mood can change. It's just one little practice. Your mindset, do you have a growth mindset? I hope you do, not a fixed mindset where you can still achieve your goals if things don't work out the way you want them to the first time, if you can move beyond disappointments, if you understand that there's more than one way to try something, that's a growth mindset. Meditation is great. If you have kids, I only ask kids to meditate or be quiet 1 minute for every year of age that they are. So if you have a 5-year-old, I don't expect more than 5 minutes of trying to be mindful and meditate. Mood, taking stock of your mood, things that might lift your mood, whether it's talking to a friend or dancing or drawing or doing some art. And then music. Music is a great uplifter. So if you have one of these M's or all of these M's, it's great, but have an M in your day every life. The next thing is A, and that's taking action or doing activities and knowing that you should not ask just why am I feeling this way, but what I could do about it. What might I be able to do about it? What would put me in a better mood? What do those times feel like when I'm feeling down? So what could I do differently? So that's taking action. And then the activities that make you happy, plan something, whether it's little short-term goals that are achievable, those will make you feel better. Not putting things off, do it anyway. If you have something that you're putting off, just do it anyway. If you've got dishes in the sink, just say, okay, I'll do it anyway. There's a great saying in psychology and in yoga and in Buddhism, stress is resistance to what is. Stress is resistance to what is. So if you're resisting doing something, if you're resisting taking action or doing something, what is it that you're resisting? What is it that's keeping you from putting that one step forward in your new journey? The K is really important. Keep connected to others. That's our social support. And social support is integral to our well-being, to our physical health, to longevity, even to immunity. People that have a support system live longer, especially important for our older folks to keep connected. And then the E is for exercise and energy work. So if you're stuck at home, find a way to get some exercise in every day. It's a mood booster. So, when I'm talking to kids and to parents, and I don't know if it's on the next slide or not, Jennifer, but we can, it might be someone else. Okay. We talk about resilience. And so, what is resilience? Resilience is something that, believe it or not, you have just had bolstered over this past year. So COVID is a pathogen, right? And in our lives, we have our own psychological immune system that's just been bolstered by going through this crisis. We have just bolstered our immunity psychologically to the stress of COVID. It's our competence in the face of adversity, being able to break through and recover, to get over setbacks, to cope with disappointment, to cope with loss and grief. It's tied to your self-efficacy. So every time you overcome a hardship or a setback, you're getting a little dose of immunity to make you stronger. And resilience transcends coping, okay? It makes you more self-aware. It also brings into the meaning of a situation. So try to figure out what this year has meant to you. Find some purpose or meaning to the narrative of your life during this year. And I love this challenge. When you're challenged by negativity, try to think of something positive to turn it upside down. And then I don't know if we have the next slide. Okay, there it is. Try this experiment. Okay, so, reduce something that's negative. And I always like to think when you have something positive, or do gratitude practice when you feel like your mood is changing, when you feel like you're becoming sad again, or when you're breaking down and you don't feel as energized to move forward. Validate how far you've come in a year. You're not the same person you were a year ago, and either are your children. And I just want to think about something for you that isn't in the slide. But when I work with parents, I try to tell parents and teachers to do the 3 R's. The 3 R's, not reading, writing, and arithmetic, but the 3 R's of resiliency, which are regulate. So help kids regulate their emotions, okay? So focus on something that will make your child feel calm and loved, whether it's a hug, sometimes it can be distracting them. So help them regulate, that's the first R, regulate their mood. The second thing is relate. Can you relate to their kids? That means validate their feelings instead of trying to solve the problem or trying to make them feel better by saying, well, don't cry, don't feel that way. Instead, validate the feelings. I know you're upset right now. I know how you feel. This is frustrating. This is sad not being able to see your friends. I know you miss school. I know you miss not being able to play baseball or soccer this year. Relate. That's the second R. Now we go into the third R, which is reason. And don't do this until you've done the first two. Don't do this until you've regulated their emotion and related to them. The third is reason. So once your child's calmed down, Now it's the time to talk about alternative strategies, alternative things that they can do to feel better while reinforcing the positive limits that you have in the home. Reassure them that you love them, okay? But that there are positive ways to deal with their emotions, positive ways to make themselves feel better and to get out their frustration. Emotions are not good or bad. Emotions are like alarm bells that are telling us something's not right. So if you think about that for yourself and your kids, that emotions are not good or bad, they're an alarm bell that will tell you that something's off, and try to figure out what is this emotion trying to tell me. And that's a good way of framing it for your kids. All right. So do we have our next person jumping on with me, Jennifer, on this slide?
Sure thing. Yeah, I can jump in real quickly. Thanks, Sherry. So I was just going to say something that I recommend to some of my patients is to not take my word for anything. Just because I'm right, the doctor doesn't mean I know what works for them. So I say, be a scientist, do an experiment, right? If you think something is not helpful, if you think something is harmful or not good for you, some examples, right? Too much caffeine, alcohol, substances, social media, too much news, too much screen time, or anything else, right? Do an experiment, cut it out for 2 weeks and pay attention to your mood. Do you feel better? Do you feel worse? Is your stress level low? Is your anger level lower? I can't tell you how many people come back to me and say, wow, I had no idea how bad the news was for me or how bad social media was for me. I felt so much lighter, so much happier, so much less anxiety and stress when I took those things away. So don't take our word for it either. Do your own experiments, right? And find the things that work for you. And then just, support others. To echo some of what Dr. Chapman was saying, right? If someone doesn't look okay, ask and then ask again, right? Ask more than once. Let them know that you care. Let them know that you're concerned. Don't try to fix things. Just be there. It's the most important thing you can do for someone in your life who is struggling. And I do see a hand up, and we're almost at the Q&A section. So just bear with us. We're almost through. We're real quickly. So myself and Dr. Chang Argulo are going to talk just about where and how to find help. There is way more information on these slides than we can tell you, and we're going to gloss through a lot of it, and we will send you these slides so that you can go through and pull out any links, resources, fact sheets, etc. that is helpful for you. So when to seek help? That's a really important question. Right? If you think that you might meet criteria for a mental health condition, or you have symptoms that are concerning, that are interfering with your life, that's a good sign that maybe it's time to do something about it. There's a great link here where you can actually take a test, just like some, quick, brief screeners, just to see, does this look concerning? Might you want to talk to a professional about some of these symptoms? If other people in your life are saying, hey, I care about you, I'm concerned, you don't seem like yourself, something seems off, something seems different, that's usually a good sign to take a look, right? We don't always see things in ourselves that we can see in others. If you notice changes in your mood, attitude, what you're doing to cope, your behavior, anything like that, that's a good sign. If any symptoms or changes are causing distress or problems, and most importantly, if they don't go away, right? All of us have icky periods at times, right? Moments of stress, moments of anxiety, moments where we're really frustrated. If the problems persist, if they're pervasive, if they're happening for a couple weeks or more and you can't get things to budge, that's a really good clue that it's time to think about doing something about it. Going to therapy, just real quickly, does not have to mean something is wrong, does not have to mean that you have a diagnosis or a condition or an illness, right? Therapy is one of the best things we can do for ourselves in terms of growth, self-awareness, growth, achieving goals, changing our behavior, getting the things that we want out of life. So it doesn't have to be, there's a problem, fix it. It can be like, hey, I need to work on myself and improve things. I want to move forward. I want to grow. Just real briefly, I'm not going to go through this, but there are two major intervention approaches for mental illness and mental health problems. That's psychotherapy, so behavioral treatment. which is what all of us on the call do today. We are all psychologists, and there are many other disciplines as well. This is not an exhaustive list. I added some degrees here so you can tell. Sometimes it's really hard to tell which credentials map onto which profession. So in case that's helpful. And also medication, psychopharmacology approaches. The disciplines that will do that as well, and how to identify them. So those are the two major things that can be helpful. Oftentimes they work really well together. Sometimes people want or prefer one or the other. Consumer protection. So just real briefly, make sure that you're seeing a provider. It doesn't matter what discipline, doesn't matter what type of treatment. Make sure you're seeing somebody who's licensed in credentials. That is the number one most important thing. See someone with formal education and training in mental illness, mental health issues. Find someone who is a licensed provider in a mental health discipline. We're psychologists. We're going to tell you how wonderful psychologists are, and we are, right? That's our PSA today. And also to say there are many other providers, many other disciplines with a lot to offer as well. Find someone licensed, find someone credentialed, most important thing. If you need to check, here's the links. You can go to the Department of Public Health. You can search by discipline. You can search for provider and ensure that someone has an active license to practice in their field. Professional organizations like Connecticut Psychological Association, where we're here today, are great. There are a lot of links here for professional organizations, different types for different disciplines. They all have provider networks where to find providers. And I am going to turn it over to Dr. Chang Angulo, who is going to talk about how to find specialized treatment when that is what you want and need.
Thank you, Jennifer. So very briefly, there are tons of resources here that that Jennifer and all the colleagues presenting have actually put together. And so the message is that we are not alone. There are many resources that we can have access to. And, we know and we understand that when you go to therapy or when you look for resources, you will find what clicks for you. And that's actually a very good thing. And if something does not click immediately, don't give up. There are many other resources that you can definitely try. So there are many resources here, and the list is numerous, but I'm not gonna go over each one, but you have, here's the resources are selected by different topics and categories. One of the things that probably I will emphasize is, the University of Connecticut, the Health Disparity Institute has actually issued a lot of wonderful resources in terms of what's happening with the BIPOC populations. And one of the things that I will encourage all of you to check out is a paper on radical healing and how we are really looking for systemic change in order to improve the mental health of different communities and different populations. So that's something that I will encourage you to check out. The other resource that I think that you can get tons of information is the National Child Stress Traumatic Network, that is also listed there, along with all the many other wonderful ones. The NCTSN.org offers a lot of information in different languages, and it is pretty includes a lot of information in terms of trauma and how during the pandemic that has been really something that has affected a lot of our communities, especially with all the different tragedies that we had seen in social media and all the different things that have been happening to communities of color. So I'm very impressed with all the lists of resources, and I'm pretty sure that you already have heard of many of them. So we encourage you to try them, to check them out, and to keep in touch and sort of disseminate information to other people who might also find it useful. So with that, I will let you. Jennifer.
Thank you. And there's so much here, again, like different types of providers, substance use options, including online, universities, wellness guides, things that you can try. Someone in the chat asked a question about how do you make connections and stay connected during COVID? It's hard, right? It's hard, but not impossible. There are ways. Temple University has a great guide here on this slide about, things to try, keeping connected while staying apart, right? Resources, virtual meetup groups, things like that. So we won't go through this. There are materials in different languages as well available. There's some mindfulness guided meditations, if that's something that you would find helpful. There is a lot here that, could be good for you, could be helpful. More information on some of the conditions that we talked about if you'd like it. Different and a lot that we didn't talk about, heart healthy lifestyle, chronic pain, right? Living with dementia. There's many things here that we believe could be helpful. Dr. Chapman did a great job of this, but just to say, these are suicide prevention resources. Again, different links, different ways to find more information, learn more about. There's a toolkit for safe firearm storage. I work in the VA. This is a VA product, but it applies to everyone. So it's a really helpful thing as well. And here again are all the crisis, suicide prevention wallet cards for you or friends, things like that. And here are the crisis support, different options that are available. It's a lot of information that we've given you. We appreciate everyone's time and attention. We hope that this was helpful. I want to really thank our panel. These are some of the busiest individuals I know, and you also graciously, gave your time to be with us this evening and share your expertise. And I, for one, am very grateful.